So, yeah, so this is a meditation session. We're planning to do 4 sessions like this of about an hour and a half or 2 hours each, roughly. And each session will be broken into 2 halves. I have a, I don't know, 10 or 15-minute break in the middle. So it means about 8 45-minute sessions, meditation, roughly. And yeah, so I made a little outline yesterday for what we'll cover in the 8 sessions. Basically, it's review. Everything. It's meditation on things we've covered in this module, obviously. But remember, meditation is part of a threefold process of hearing or learning about something new, and then contemplation, thinking about it yourself, and then meditating on it. So generally, there's a kind of wisdom we develop through each, the wisdom of hearing, learning about something. So the more you hear, the more you listen to explanations and read about explanations, the more you have that kind of wisdom of hearing. Then the wisdom of contemplation. So then the more you think about what you've heard and analyze it and check it, then the more you have that kind of wisdom of contemplation. And then on that basis, you meditate on what you've contemplated. So this topic, emptiness, yeah, there's a lot to think about. So and the meditation sessions also, it doesn't have to, but during these meditations also, we do take the time to think about things, right? So these kind of like analytical meditations typically both involve, contemplation and meditation. Meditation being where you more single-pointedly just focus on what you've concluded, right? What you've come to understand, you've concluded is to be the case. But when we're meditating, we're often thinking about, well, is something true or not? Is it the case or not? So it includes both contemplation and meditation. But I wanted to tell you, I guess, as part of all that is feel free to have notes and books and stuff open in front of you while you're meditating to refer to stuff. So, but not to use like the whole meditation session as a study session, like not be looking and reading stuff the whole time, but just to refer to, if you you think, oh, maybe that quote is relevant to this, or what did so and so say about this, and something, there's something you've already read, ideally, and you just want to refer to it and use it to spark your contemplation. You're welcome to do that. Yeah, but again, don't use the whole session just to sit and read stuff. It's not the point of a meditation session. Yeah, okay. So I'll send out those rough outlines I made. I'll reference those while I'm leading the meditation. But and I'll send them out afterwards, or send them to Mary Ellen to email to you. But they're just rough outlines, kind of guide of what we'll be looking at each session. So this session will be sort of going in the order of the way we covered things in the module. So the first session we looked at, well, why is it important to meditate on emptiness? And the main reason is because it's the opposite of the wisdom. There's the wisdom realizing emptiness, and then the opposite of that is the ignorance grasping at inherent existence, or grasping at things existing from their own side. And it's because that ignorance is the cause, gives rise to the other afflictive emotions, attachment and anger and so forth. And it's through the force of those that we create contaminated karma, right? Karma. And through the force of that we take rebirth and are cycling in suffering of samsara again and again. So in the first session we'll think about that. Why, is it true, that ignorance grasping at inherent existence is the cause of suffering? And related to that, why is it important to meditate on emptiness? And then, so that's the first half of today's session. And then the second half, which means the second session, well, yeah, I'm kind of mixing up the terms, but is just thinking about dependent arising in general, right? Trying to fill out our understanding, our view of dependent arising. But also another thing just before we start is to Yeah, like I usually say, meditation is a very personal thing. So we need to, be in tune to our own kind of needs and inclinations. So don't feel you have to follow the instruction, that I'm giving. I can only give one set of instructions for all of you. And also, I mean, even if I could give instructions for each of you, I don't have clairvoyance to know like what's going on in your mind. So, yeah, so be attuned to your own kind of needs, and then you can meditate on kind of whatever you want, as long as it's somewhat related to what we're the topic. Um, but I know especially emptiness can be frustrating to meditate on, because aspects of it are quite complex. So yeah, so on the one hand, it's good if you also read between sessions to refresh your memory, and especially about the different reasonings to establish emptiness. And on the other hand, if you feel like you need to just think about something else, or just watch your breath, or do whatever during a session, you're also free to do that. Yeah. Okay. So with that said, let's go ahead and start. So we'll start with positive motivation, and then refuge and bodhicitta prayer, and I'll share my screen for that, and then some placement meditation for a bit, and then on the first main topic. Okay. So first, get comfortable in your meditation posture, and try to focus your mind on an object of meditation, just to generate some focused attention before we generate a motivation. Mhm. And then, so to generate a motivation, it's good to visualize oneself surrounded by all sentient beings. Um, yeah, so as we usually do, then you can visualize your father of this life sitting at your right, and then all your male friends and family seated to your right and behind you. And then your mother of this life at your immediate left, and all your female friends and family to your left and behind you. Remember how you're interconnected with them, so just briefly bring them to mind. And then those whom you find antagonistic can and have to especially practice patience towards, and be mindful not to become angry with. So seated directly in front of you, those people, antagonists, facing towards you. And then all the other sentient beings that exist who have been from life to life, who have been our kind mothers, fathers, friends, and so forth, and who are the same as us and wishing to have suffering and wishing to be free from suffering, wishing to have happiness, and independence at home, where every happiness arises. So yeah, bring to mind all sentient beings. Imagine them all seated around you. So then think briefly about why you're engaging in this session personally, and in relation to others. Yeah, why you're meditating on emptiness. Mm. So try to generate a very positive motivation. Aiming for the highest, your highest possible aspirations for yourself and others. And then we can read at the outset here this and contemplate briefly on the four immeasurables. So we'll just read through one time and then spend some moments trying to generate these attitudes. So this is the four immeasurable thoughts. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to abide in equanimity, free from attachment to friends and anger towards enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have these. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free from these. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. And then how wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be never separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. May they never be separated from this. I myself will cause them to be never separated from this. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. So try to spend a few moments and try to generate within bodhicitta or mixed with bodhicitta or related to bodhicitta. Try to generate immeasurable equanimity, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable love, immeasurable joy. And then in order to accomplish all those positive aspirations, and it, it's, what do you say, invaluable to have guidance and protection from suffering on the one hand, and guidance and inspiration on the other hand. So if you like, you can visualize a field of refuge, space in front of you. You know, Shakyamuni Buddha, who originally taught this, especially the entire path of enlightenment, and the nature of samsara, especially identified the cause of samsara as grabbing at an exaggerated sense of self. And the antidote to that being the wisdom that realizes selflessness, emptiness. So you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha or your own teacher or any object of refuge in the space in front of you. And then if you like, you can also visualize separate objects of the Dharma. So yeah, usually in Buddhist practice, visualize objects of the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, and then texts to represent the Dharma, and then the Buddha himself or other Buddhist saints, scholars around Buddha, including ones and down, on down from the time of Buddha and on down in lineage to one's own teacher. So however you like, bring to mind objects of refuge. And then if you like, you can just recite this taking refuge and generating bodhicitta prayer. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly by my two collections of, actually it says listing, it should be, let's see, for this session we'll be meditating on, I'll edit it quickly. By my two collections, so many it's the collections of merit and wisdom, of meditating on the Dharma. May I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened, and the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly are my two collections of meditating on the Dharma. May I become a Buddha to benefit all transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened, and the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly are my two collections of meditating on the Dharma. May I become a Buddha to benefit all transmigratory beings. So try to generate in your own way the mind of refuge. And then you can imagine, if you like, you can visualize from Buddha's heart or from whatever object of refuge, then white light rays flow out, purifying, flowing in through your crown, filling your entire body, blissful kind of liquid white light, purifying all of your obscurations, especially through meditating on emptiness and generating insight into emptiness. And then the same happens for all the other sentient beings seated around you. So visualize white light purifying obstacles and obscurations. And then visualize golden light rays flowing out from every pore of Buddha's body and flowing in through one's crown and the crown of all sentient beings seated around you. So golden light rays, like wavy, golden, liquid light flowing in through you and all sentient beings, filling your entire body, blessing you and all sentient beings to develop all the realizations on the path to enlightenment, and especially wisdom realizing emptiness. So now we can start on the actual part of the session. So if you remember, let's see. Yep. So we're thinking about. So this is from the first session on how to. Yeah. Why is it important to meditate on emptiness? Then I gave a bunch of quotes from some sutras relating to that. So if you like, you can also open up the PowerPoint slide on your own device and look at those. Hmm. Yeah, so this is one from the King of Concentration Sutra. I'll just mention it first. And then we'll maybe look at one other one from Aryadeva. So here the Buddha says, if you analytically discern the lack of self and phenomena, and if you cultivate that analysis and meditation, this will cause the result, the attainment of nirvana. There is no peace through any other means. So then the question is, well, why and how? So then there's this, oh yeah, not by Aryadeva, by Nagarjuna. So there's this verse that His Holiness encourages us to reflect on again and again, showing kind of the progression of how samsara is created. So from ignorance gives rise to inaccurate concepts, exaggerating how things can please us or disturb us, how things are, that exaggerating that things are sources of happiness or suffering from their own side. And then that gives rise to afflictive emotions, attachment for the one, aversion for the other. That gives rise to karma. That gives rise to suffering. So the verse reads, and I'll just leave this here on the screen as we meditate. By exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated. Karma and afflictive emotions come from false conceptions. Those come from elaboration, means the kind of grasping at inherent existence. As for elaboration, it is ceased by emptiness, indicates the truth of the path, or it can also read in Sanskrit, it is ceased in emptiness, which indicates the truth of cessation. So I'll just leave that there. You can reference that or open up the PowerPoint slide or the outlines I sent on your own device and look at that. But the main thing to meditate here is, okay, why is it important to meditate on emptiness? So the first question is, is it the case that so we want to make it personal, right? So is it the case that samsara, as one experiences it, and in general for others as well, does it actually arise from this ignorance, grasping at oneself as a person existing from their own side, or other phenomena existing from their own side? Yeah, maybe let's just leave it with that question first, and then I'll add other questions after 5 minutes or so. So first, again, is it the case that suffering of oneself and other sentient beings arises from this ignorance, grasping at things existing independently or unrelated to others, having a concrete existence from their own side? What becomes especially relevant that is it the case that afflictive emotions, one's own afflictive emotions, arise from that kind of ignorance? Okay, so reflect for, yeah, just reflect on that different ways. So then one might also ask, looking at suffering, one's own, most disturbing ideas, concepts, and emotions. That things, the ideas and emotions, thoughts that arise that disturb one's own mind the most. Do they arise from? Are they underpinned by or compelled by sort of selfish concern on the one hand, self-centered concern? And does that arise from grasping at a sense of self, as if there's an I, a self existing from its own side? Mm. And briefly, one might also think about karma. The last module was on all about karma, right? So the karmas that oneself has created in this life, or the karma one feels like one's experiencing in this life, has that also been created through the force of this ignorance, grasping at an inherently existent self, the I existing from its own side. So has the karma that compels, existence and different suffering experiences also arisen from this ignorance, grasping at self. Mm. And then maybe finally think about the more generally outside of oneself, other sentient beings, other friends, family, or the world in general, different kinds of sufferings that people experience, and think about are those all related to? Is it true that they all arise from um, grasping at an inherently existent self or other phenomena? So one helpful way to think about it also is to think about the intermediate step of selfishness, right? because all selfishness, self-centered, kind of egocentric actions, of course, are centered around this very solid sense of self. I mean, arise from that. So how selfishness arises from self-grasping, and selfishness also gives rise to so many problems. Greed, jealousy on the one hand, and hatred and violence on the other hand. So think about more in a general way the problems that you see others experiencing in the world in general or other people that you know. And reflect on, is it the case that, as the Buddha taught, that those arise from selfishness, and that arises from self-grasping, grasping at an inherent existent self and others. Mhm. And then finally, just for a few moments, then thinking about all these different problems oneself faces, others face, is it the case that, um, reflecting on coming to more deeply understand dependent arising and selflessness, that can actually resolve or work towards, a resolution of those problems and the elimination of suffering, by reducing selfish concern and by reducing grasping at an inherently existent self. So just reflect on that for a few moments, and then we'll take a break. Okay, so let's pause there and take a 10-minute break. Okay, so let's continue. Um, yeah, so like I said before, also, if there's I know sometimes when we're meditating, we start thinking about something and we want to continue thinking about that. We each have our own trains of thought, right? So if, yeah, that's the case, then feel free to pursue your own kind of course of investigation. But yeah, if you like to, also happy to just follow my suggestion, what to think about, what to ask about, as I suggest. Um, so, and then also it's good to, I mean, try to tie in, you know, everything. So, for example, when we've just been meditating on, you know, is it really the case that this ignorance grasping at inherent existence gives rise to afflictive emotions and suffering? And now we're going to, the second half, we're going to meditate now on dependent arising in general, but you can relate the two, you know, don't leave them totally separate. So, okay, so this session, and meditate on, just try to fill out our view. Remember, His Holiness always says, you know, in Buddhism, there's two main things: the view of dependent arising. You know, we should view, the worldview should be viewing ourselves and everything else as being dependently arising phenomena, and then compelled by that, the behavior or the attitude of compassion, having compassion for all sentient beings. So for this session, we want to focus primarily on filling out our view of dependent arising. So we can look at both ourself as a person and then other phenomena other than ourself as a person, from, you know, within our own aggregates, our body and mind, and then other people, you know, around us, and then external environment, the inanimate environment. So all those things. So we can divide into two, self and other, and then we can divide into three kinds, the three main kinds of dependent arising: arising on dependence upon causes and conditions, and then dependence upon parts, and dependence upon imputation, you know, concepts, thinking this is that, or that is that. So I would suggest we start with, this time, let's start with the external world and dependent arising. So um, yeah, so we'll start looking at the external world first, and it can be the inanimate environment, and also the sentient beings that occupy other sentient beings. Um, and think about, yeah, how those dependent and different objects. So you come up with your own examples, all different kinds of things that um, exemplify each kind of dependent arising. So we'll start with dependence upon causes, conditions, and then look at parts, and then the most subtle, mental imputation. And then we'll do the same with relation to ourselves as a person. All right, so first, yeah, just settle your mind, focus your attention on the object of placement meditation for a minute or two. Mm. And then we can turn our attention towards dependent arising. So let's start with phenomena other than persons. So look at the external world. Let's start looking at the external environment. The earth, the oceans, the trees, sky, the four elements, particles. Any example you want to look at things in the external environment. And first let's look at how they're arise and dependence upon causes and conditions. So just find as many different examples and look at those examples as you can. Find as many different examples as you can. Look at different examples of how things in the external environment arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. Mhm. And then let's look at dependent arising on parts, how things exist in dependence upon parts. Again, in the external environment. And one question to ask, is there anything that, to gradually look at, is there anything that doesn't have parts? Is there anything that's partless, that isn't constituted or composed of parts, or dependent upon its parts or its instances? So for about 5 minutes, look at dependent, how things exist in dependence upon their parts. Mhm. And then let's look at the dependent arising on mental imputation, things existing on being imputed by concepts or labeled by the mind. So some of the examples that we discussed in classes were like a table. How a table is labeled upon its parts. So you can think about different objects like that, how they're labeled upon their parts like that. Or a letter. We talked about the letter A. And then also different, like a kind of title, like the president or mother or child. And then we can also look at, how things are labeled in dependence upon their relationship to other things. Like, something is only short in relation to something else which is long. We consider things good or bad in dependence upon, whether we feel that they're pleasant or unpleasant, our kind of opinion. Sense of, self is dependent upon there being others. Consider others in dependence upon self. So all those different kinds of mental imputation, how things exist in dependence upon being imputed upon in relation to other things, and especially how things exist in dependence upon being imputed upon their basis of imputation. We see a collection of things, like go back to example of table. There's a collection of parts put together in such and such a way that they have a certain kind of functions. And then upon that we label this, give it a name, table, or other objects. So spend some time reflecting on how things exist in dependence upon a mental imputation. About 5 minutes again. Mm. So if you like, you can relax your attention for a couple minutes. Yeah, readjust your posture, have a drink of water, something. Mm. So let's resume. So now we'll be looking at the dependent arising of ourself as a person or other people, persons in general, how the person is dependent upon, exists in dependence upon, first causes and conditions, and then parts, and then mental imputation. So why don't you can divide up, I'll leave 10 minutes to look at those three, and you can look at them in order all together, however you like. So reflecting how the person, it's probably best to use oneself as the example, how a person exists, how oneself exists in dependence upon all different infinite causes and conditions and infinite parts. And then upon those parts, one labels a person, and thereby the person exists. So look at those three different kinds of dependent arising in relation to oneself as a person. And then gradually you can also look at use other people as an examples. Mhm. And then briefly also, it's good to look at how one's own mind, reflecting on dependent arising itself as a dependent arising for a few minutes. Look at how one's own mind, reflecting on anything, especially reflecting on now, dependent arising, how that mind itself is a dependent arising. And one's own mind in general is a dependently arising phenomena, dependence upon causes, conditions, parts, and mental imputation. Mm. And then finally, um, is there anything that exists whatsoever that is not a dependently arising phenomena? So in conclusion, try to analyze, is there anything that exists at all that does not depend upon either causes or parts or mental imputation in any way whatsoever? Mm, okay, so let's pause there. So so that's the conclusion for the session. I mean, we'll dedicate, but so I think the next session is on Saturday. There's 2 sessions on Saturday. The timings are in your email. But in the intervening time, try to practice mindfulness, in your daily life. Mindfulness of these 2 things: how suffering arises from ignorance of dependent arising and ignorance grasping at, inherently existent self and others, phenomena, and so forth. And then also try to just be mindful of how phenomena are interdependently arising, interdependently related in general, in all different contexts and instances. Um, yeah. So let's dedicate. Um, I need to share my screen still. I'll share a couple first dedication. So yeah, think of all the merit we've created by trying to meditate on emptiness. It's very different than meditating on like death, isn't it? But yeah, I think we have to put a little more effort maybe. But yeah, it's very worthwhile if we can. So think of all the merit we've created. We're trying to meditate on the Buddhist teachings and rejoice. Rejoice in the merit created by others, and rejoice in the merit created by other ordinary sentient beings like ourselves, and also all the virtuous actions performed by all enlightened beings everywhere, the past, the present, the future. All this merit we gathered together, we can dedicate. In short, may ourselves and all sentient beings be free from every form of misery, problems, and suffering, confusion, and ignorance, especially ignorance, grasping at independent self, which gives rise to selfishness. And may all sentient beings, ourselves and others, have every form of well-being and happiness, peace and harmony, prosperity, food, clothing, medicines, and be free from harm, especially everywhere in the world where there's a war and violence, such as Ukraine, Syria, other countries. May those conflicts quickly come to an end. Um, yeah, and other forms of violence and abuse, shootings and domestic abuse, and so forth. And especially, yeah, the global pandemic, COVID-19 may quickly come to an end, and climate destruction may be reversed, and all the other major challenges facing humanity. And we find a way to overcome, find solutions for those. Then add any other prayers you'd like to bring them to mind for specific people or intentions. Um, then we can conclude with these 2 verses highlighted here. Um, these are from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, for as long as space remains, and for as long as sentient beings remain. Until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And especially may we all quickly, and all sentient beings quickly generate deep insight and wisdom realizing, understanding, dependent arising, and emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, thank you all. See you Saturday.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Like,
Thank you, Venerable Woodstock.
Thank you.
So much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Cheers.
Everyone.